Kang's origin is a little confusing due to how much time travel is involved, with him being the literal master of time and whatnot, but also because it takes place all over time and not necessarily in a straight line, as well as on many different Earths. Kang's origin is almost a paradox because who we can call the original Kang, or the benefactor, Nathaniel Richards from the main 616 Marvel timeline and Reed Richards' father, traveled to Earth 6311, where the real Kang the Conqueror, or Kang Prime, is from, and brought peace to said Earth. Thanks to the robotics and cross-dimensional technology brought to this Earth by the benefactor, as well as his super genius intellect, using a time machine left behind by the benefactor, Nathaniel Richards sought the means to become an overlord of the space-time continuum. Then, bored of his world's peacetime, Kang used the time device to travel to Earth 616's ancient Egypt, where he took on his first moniker and became the Pharaoh Rama-Tut. That was his first real taste of power, however it was quite short-lived, as he was defeated by the time-traveling Fantastic Four, a young Apocalypse, the Moon God Khonshu, and modern-era heroes Doctor Strange and the Avengers. On his way back to the 30th century after his humiliating loss, a time storm diverted him to the modern era, where he rescued a space-lost Doctor Doom. Inspired by Doom's visage, he created the armored identity the Scarlet Centurion, but later abandoned it after losing yet again to the Avengers in another timeline, Earth 689, in one of his various attempts to rule that world. After abandoning the Scarlet Centurion identity, Nathaniel tried to return to his native time but overshot by 1,000 years and ended up in Earth 6311's 40th century when the world was decimated by war. While there, he assumed the moniker Kang the Conqueror, donning his iconic blue and green armor, and became a warlord replete with an army. Although he did spare the kingdom of Corellius for the king's daughter's hand in marriage, Princess Ravonna Renslayer. Ring a bell? Yes, who we could call the main villain in Loki Season 1. But she was largely unimpressed by Kang's victories, and despite his show of mercy, refused his proposal. Down the line, Ravonna realized her love for Kang and saved his life from a disgruntled commander within his ranks, although it almost cost her her life. Putting her in a kind of stasis, Kang eventually found the means to save her prior to her death, but in doing so, created a divergent reality where Kang perished instead. Peering into time, he also discovered that his exploration had caused additional divergent realities and more Kangs with which to contend. Exhibit A, the Organized Council of Kangs in Avengers 1963, number 267 through 269, or what He Who Remains spoke of at the end of Loki. Multiple Kangs fighting for the top, causing the first multiversal war, and I'll talk about who He Who Remains actually is later, because he's not exactly a pre-existing version of Kang, but rather an amalgamation of two other characters. So how many Kangs are there really? There's the benefactor, the version who made all of this possible, Kang Prime, there's his future self, the all-knowing Immortus who was directed by the Timekeepers to destroy the Avengers, but ultimately became obsessed with them. Then there's the Scarlet Centurions, one of Kang's many spawned sons who were trained and killed if they didn't meet Dad's impossibly high expectations. All but one, Marcus 23, made it through this grueling process. We also can't forget his younger self who joined the Young Avengers as Iron Lad and attempted to stop his old, embittered variant from becoming Kang the Conqueror. And there are countless others. I mean, there's an entire council of Kangs and the Council of Cross-Time Kangs, so it'd be impossible to name them all. But the most important, most powerful, most evil one is Kangaroo. Just kidding. But two that are extremely important are the MCU versions. He Who Remains, and whatever version appears in Ant-Man 3, although that one will probably just be Kang Prime, of course with a modified MCU origin story. But He Who Remains, the one played by Jonathan Majors, is actually a combination of Immortus, the version I spoke about briefly before who worked for the Timekeepers, which although fake, we did see in Loki as the heads of the TVA, and the actual He Who Remains from Marvel Comics, who's the final director of the Time Variance Authority at the Citadel at the end of time, the last reality in the multiverse. So basically what Marvel Studios did is they combined both characters to create the version we saw in the show, which makes sense as they're very connected in the comics. So now you know the basics about Kang, and are ready to see him appear in all his time-traveling glory in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. But there are some other interesting tidbits that are worth mentioning. Kang is actually a descendant of Reed Richards. Like I stated at the very beginning of the video, it was actually Reed Richards' father, Nathaniel Richards, who traveled to Earth 6311 and brought peace to that Earth, leading to the creation of Kang, who was also named Nathaniel Richards. Same family, just born many, many years later. However, in the comics, and this is where most people get confused, after losing to the Fantastic Four and Avengers in ancient Egypt during his tenure as Rama-Tut, he found and saved the space-lost Doctor Doom. In the comics, Kang stated a couple times that he may have been a descendant of Doom, however that's actually never been confirmed. Kang's headquarters, Chronopolis, a place similar to Doctor Doom's Battleworld, is located on the outskirts of the timeless dimension Limbo, with access points to all of the other time areas that Kang has conquered, and each city block exists in its own time period. So while Battleworld was made up of entirely new realities from the remnants of incursion points between collapsing worlds, Chronopolis was a giant city made up of sections from different points across time, and while not confirmed, fans do believe that the city seen in the Quantum Realm in Ant-Man and the Wasp could be Chronopolis. It's also currently being rumored that the mysterious glowy figure seen in the Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness trailer isn't actually Maria Rambeau's Photon variant or Tom Cruise's Iron Man variant, but rather a variant of Kang the Conqueror, who instead of making the Time Variance Authority to keep the proper flow of time and his many time-traveling brothers from wreaking havoc, joined the Illuminati, a team consisting of the most powerful characters in the multiverse. But let me know what you think about Kang, and how excited are you to see him in the MCU?